So let's make some distinctions in terms of what the results are, conceptually, let's say, by the end of Book 4. One, we have a general theory of human nature, which, let's say, is value neutral, in the sense that it's purely descriptive. This is what a human being is made up of. These are the parts of a human being. And that's the simple thing that's represented on that line that I gave you, which is not, of course, does not appear in the book. It's just a line, a representation. And that is that we are, all of us, all human beings are made up of three parts, according to Socrates. Reason, the rationally calculating element. The spirited part, or will, just like willpower, and the desires. That is value neutral, it's purely descriptive. That's one thing we've arrived at. The second thing is a theory of justice in the individual. That is, what does it mean to say that a person is just? According to Socrates' definition of justice, to be just means to have your parts in order. These three parts ordered in the right way, to have them in what he calls a harmony. And that means that the rational part rules along the model of the city, and the guardian's ruling. The spirited part carries out the orders of the rational part, this is willpower, and the desires obey or are ruled by reason, the calculating element. So that's what it means to be just. So that's the second thing. So we have a theory of human nature, we have a theory of what it means to be a just person, that is how the parts of human nature should be arranged so that the person can be called just. But remember, that's not what we're looking for. I mean, those things are steps along the way. The question that Socrates has been challenged to address is whether we should be just or unjust. That is, whether we should choose to live a just life or an unjust life. Now, we've had that narrowed down. Like, what exactly does it mean in Socratic terms to be just? It means to have these parts in order. And what's the most essential element of the ordering of the parts? Well, here, I think we could look at the definition of temperance, which is, remember, the better part ruling over the worse. The better part of human nature, the assumption here is reason. The worse part, the desires. So a moderate person, or a temperate person, is the person whose reason rules over their desires. The definition of justice turns out to be not very different from the definition of moderation. If the just person is the person whose parts are all doing what they're supposed to do, the essential element of that is that reason, the rational part, rules over the rest of the self. So when I say that the question has been specified here, what I mean is that Socrates has shown us, supposedly, that to be just is to have the rational part of the self rule over all else. So to be just is to be rational, in the sense that rationality, reason, thinking, and those sort of aspects of human nature are the ones that are most important and the ones that deserve to rule. Now here's where the question gets very murky. Remember, this whole thing is set up on the basis of the city that Socrates built. And what was built into the city was that the guardians deserved to rule, because after all, they're the best people, right, according to the way it was set up. We very quickly move to the individual self and the part that corresponds to the guardians, rationality, deserving to rule over the rest of the self because it's the best. Well, that hasn't been established at all, although it seems to have been at the end of Book 4. If we look at what happens on page 134, it's very interesting. Socrates says on page 134, next to margin number 445, "So it now remains, it seems, for us to consider whether it is more profitable to do just actions, engage in fine practices, and be just, whether one is known to be so or not, or to do injustice and be unjust, provided that one does not have to pay the penalty and become a better person as a result of being punished." That is, Socrates remembers what the whole thing is about. That is, he remembers what all this talk has been for. It's to answer that specific question about the relative value of the just and unjust life. That is, he recognizes that they still have to address that question. But look at what Glaucon says. But Socrates, that question seems to me at least to have become ridiculous, now that the two have been shown to be as we have described. Life does not seem worth living when the body's natural constitution is ruined, not even if one has food and drink of every sort, all the money in the world, and every political office imaginable. So how, even if one could do whatever one wished, except what would liberate one from vice and injustice, and make one acquire justice and virtue, could it be worth living when the natural constitution of the very thing by which we live is ruined and in turmoil? That is, Glaucon assumes that the question has been answered. Socrates has set up his theory of human nature in such a way that the health of the soul depends upon rationality ruling. That's the harmony. Everything else would be a disharmony. So to choose to be unjust would more or less be choosing to have another part of the soul, most likely the desires, be the most important part and rule over the self instead of reason. That would be to choose to be unjust. But the way that Glaucon is putting it, that would be like choosing to be sick, and even worse, because the body being sick is a very bad thing, but the soul being sick is an even worse thing. So Glaucon assumes that the question has been answered. That is the main question of the book. Should I be just? Should I be unjust? Which is the happier life? Glaucon says, well, choosing to be unjust, which is more or less choosing to have the desires rule over the self. That is, they call the shots. They decide what we do instead of reason. That to make such a choice is like choosing to be sick, and that's stupid, and no one would do it. But remember Thrasymachus, who I believe is still there, although he's more or less silent. Let's speak up for him, and I'll try to speak for him. Socrates, he might say, you're a genius. This three-part theory of the self, of the individual person, brilliant. We are made up of rationality, the will, or the spirited part, and desires. I accept it totally. And your theory of justice, that's pretty good too. If justice is when reason rules over desire, I'll accept that too. That is, sure, that's justice is doing what you think is right or what you think is good rather than what your desires want. Sure, we'll call that justice. So I'll accept your theory of human nature and I'll accept your theory of justice. But that's not the question that we were addressing here. The question is, which sort of life should I live? And the way you've set it up is, what part of myself should I follow, should I put on top in order to be happy? Socrates, you have claimed that it is rationality, but that's rather arbitrary. Why would that make me happier than any other part ruling? What if I said that I choose to follow the desires? So on that line, let's put the desires on top, the spirited part in the middle, and rationality in the bottom. Let's say that desire rules over reason, which is to say, can I say that to be happy, my desires call the shots and reason is just a tool for me to carry out and get what I want? Why can't I say that? If Thrasymachus did say something like that, he'd be fully justified. That is, Socrates has given us a theory of human nature, a theory of justice, and simply a claim that we should be just, which means following the rational part. Thrasymachus would be fully within his rights to say, I accept your theory of human nature, I accept your theory of justice, and you know what? I choose to be unjust. That is, I choose to follow the desires. I think he could be fully, again, within his rights saying that. So now the question is, where do we go from here? Does Socrates think he's like Glaucon, that he's answered the question? Does Plato, who wrote the book, think that Socrates has answered the question? What if they do think that the question has been answered, that is, answered in the sense that they've proven that the just life is the happier life, and therefore the life where rationality rules over the desires is the happy life? If they do think that they've proved that, why does the book go on? And it does go on. There's 6 more books, and we'll read through book 7. I think that where we are now is sort of, we're not sure where things are going, but one thing we do know is that Socrates has to give us some further proof